Hello, everyone, and welcome to Telling Tales. Welcome to this, the very first installment of a kind of round table discussion podcast style thing that we're doing. I don't know if this will end up being anything regular, but it gives us something to do in this festive week off when people weren't available to be playing our regular series. So yeah, isn't that exciting? We do have two regular series, which you can watch if you want. We'd love it if you did. They are Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition and Simbaroom. They usually run on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 8 o'clock GMT, and they'll be starting up again on the 5th and 6th of January. We've also got social links and Patreon and all that good stuff, including YouTube, which has all of our historical streams in there in VOD format. All those links are down below, so feel free to pop down there should your curiosity about those things need sating. But that's enough of that. Let's bring on the people, most of whom you have already met via Telling Tales, who will be talking tonight and talking specifically about the issue of online tabletop role-playing, kind of pros of it, cons of it versus traditional in-person, and also the challenges inherent in moving from offline role-playing to online role-playing, something which many of us have been doing in this cursed year of our Dark Lord 2020. So without any further ado, let's bring on the people. You know him best as Arthur Norris, pharmacological vampire mastermind from our Vampire the Masquerade series. It's John.
Hello.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I've got a fancy new mic, which hopefully someone notices.
That's not technically true, is it, John?
That's not true.
You've got a fancy new sound card.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a doodad.
It's a doodad. It's an internal doodad, like all the best doodads. We also have, again, you know him as a curmudgeonly old mercenary. He also plays Steo in Simbaroom. It's Chris. It's Chris, isn't it?
Hello.
Hi. Chris, how are you and your friends?
What my non-sapient,
Yes.
fluffy, adorable friends?
Yes.
Everyone's doing fine apart from me, who's on the brink of a psychological collapse, like most of us.
Well, you're in good company this year, aren't you? You're in good company. And the worst of company as well. All the company there is. You know our next player best as Mandrel, a Nosferatu craftswoman and architect on the Vampire series. It's Justin. It's only bloody Justin.
Wow.
Who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
Who would have thought it would be Justin? And how are you today, Justin?
I'm good.
Super.
I fixed the light switch.
That's good.
Very exciting.
Although, is it slightly out of keeping for a vampire?
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, you're going around the dark a lot, and if you've got low awareness like my character, then you don't want to be bumping into things.
Yeah, that's true. And you don't have Gleam of Red Eyes, the Protean level. I'm rambling. So
I don't think Mandrel would leave handy
Exactly.
jobs.
Repairing things around the house
that's
is
true.
Mandrel's deal.
It's Mandrel's thing. I do like the idea. We could frame an entire series around Mandrel's new light fixture repair business.
Yeah,
let's do that. It would be new. No one's done that before, for no good reason. So we have a final discusser tonight. He's not been on the channel before, but you're going to get to know him, gentle viewer, because he will be taking on the first ongoing series for the channel that I won't be running as a GM. He's going to be running a Call of Cthulhu series starting in January, and his name is Jonny. Hello, Jonny.
Hello.
Hi. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for reminding me that I'm going to be the first person to run a game that isn't you on the channel. Just to
it's no pressure. It's no pressure.
Yeah.
After all, far be it from me to say that I was in any way an expert games master. I've only got 30 years under my belt, so just live up to that.
Yep.
Jonny, that if you dare live up to that.
But also, if I dare not live
But
up to
also
that
don't.
and
But
bring
also
the channel
do.
down. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every time I talk to you via an online medium, Jonny, that window is open behind you, and I know it's because of cats. But I'm always vaguely afraid / excited that I might see some hideous creature crawling through it.
What Matt means is that because of the trauma that the recent remake of the film Cats has caused me, I always leave one window open in case I need to make a brisk escape as somebody has put the film Cats on in my home.
Is it because you've firmly shut the door on that movie?
Yeah.
And when you shut a door on something, you need to open a window.
Open a physical other virtual door. Or you constantly need fresh air to just keep you, in a state of, because otherwise it's an ongoing, raging sort of sense of anxiety.
Or it's in case a horribly animated, furry version of James Corden walks through your front door. You need to make a quick exit.
I actually have weapons in my house just in case the real James Corden calls round. So these things are understandable. I did say before we started tonight to these guys, this will be definitely more informal and rambling and loose than one of our actual play streams. And so far, it's lived up to that. So there we go. But let's start talking about the topic at hand. So it was we had quite a discussion on what topic to pick for this, but this one really leapt out, I think, because of the year we're in, right? And it's generally a good topic to talk about online because it's all about online. So we're going to be discussing first the kind of cons, the bad bits of playing tabletop role-playing online, and then some of the good bits as well. And then we're going to talk about the challenges in moving from one to the other, because I know my groups, as well as the groups of Justin and Jonny and lots of other people within Tell and Tales, and lots of people out there, for you fine folk, have had to make that leap this year because of the pandemic. And it sucks. It really sucks. But maybe there's some good things to be had from it, and maybe also there is some tips and tricks or that we could drop on you, or you could drop on us. Feel free to shout things out in the comments as well. And let's just talk. Let's just have a good time and talk about it. Yeah. So we haven't exactly got an agenda, but we have come up with some kind of bullet points that we're going to talk about through the thing, and I'll walk through them. I won't be kind of a moderator because my impartiality in this is zero, because I am made up of very strong opinions about all these things. So if I tried to do that, I'd be debarred from moderator school. But first off, let's talk about the cons, right? The cons of online play. And one of them, the first topic for discussion, is about impersonality. So generally, being distanced from your players or your GM is a pretty tricky thing to get to grips with a lot. A lot of the time, we're lucky enough that we use cams because we're streaming. Some people may not have access to those or prefer not to use those, or for whatever reason. So the problem is even worse for them. But there's issues to do with, all that kind of online etiquette stuff, interruptions, body language, etc., etc. And it's a problem. And as we go through these topics, I'll just pick a random person to start talking about it, and then they can roll us off. But as a GM who's done stuff online this year, Jonny, being as you're new, let's put you on the spot immediately.
Sure.
What's your hot take on this?
Yeah, I've found I play on a Wednesday with a group of people, one of whom is in the chat, Meg. And we kind of didn't pick it up straight away, because the way that we do it is we kind of one of us will run a game for, say, 10 weeks roughly. Like, somebody will do kind of a few weeks of a game, and then we move on and somebody else runs something, and we work through different systems and storylines, and it's nice. Everybody gets kind of a turn on it for a sort of short story. And one of our players doesn't have a camera. So, and I do feel like that has probably affected their amount of involvement potentially. They don't seem to make as much noise as everybody else, even though obviously they have a mic, so they can make as much noise as everybody else. But I do think that they're kind of hanging back a little bit potentially because they can see. I know there is an issue a little bit with passing of body language across this medium, but they can kind of see maybe when other people are waiting to say something. But if he's waiting to say something, we can't see that he is. And another thing around interruptions, because there is, I don't know how much of a lag precisely there is over Discord, which is what we use, maybe 1/10 of a second or something. But it does mean that people end up doing the kind of dance down the street that you do when you don't know which direction somebody's going to go in. And even two people at the same time might say, no, you go. And then you're just kind of in this position where it takes 5 goes to get resolved because people are just kind of dancing around each other because they're each working on a lag. And so it does have that a little bit. And in terms of it being impersonal as well, as it is for everybody with this year in general, I do miss being around the same table with people to play the game. It does lose something by being online, I think, in that sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking about with the game that I'm running right now with John as a player is that, for me, it doesn't feel as impersonal because I know all the players. I've been playing with them for many years. But John, for some of the play, apart from maybe Steve, who I've not known as long, John, lots of these players that you're playing with now in that game, you've never met in person, or maybe very briefly in person at a birthday or something, but otherwise are unlikely to have met them before. So do you find that, I don't find this issue so much because I have a very easy idea imagining, you kind of get that feel for a person and their expressions and their emotes and how those sounds relate to even the shape of their what face they're making when they're making that sound. But I don't know for you whether you found that like playing with people you hadn't met before online, whether that made it more difficult to do that kind of thing or what.
I think it made it more difficult at the beginning just because of social convention reasons. Like, it's the same reason I don't really like the phone, because you are learning someone for the first time. But after a while, I found I picked up on the tone of their voice at around the same speed I think I would pick up their facial expressions. So it was maybe more intimidating at first, but once I got over it, there's not much difference. I do feel like I haven't socialized with those people to the same degree that I would have if I'd been in the same room, just because there's a certain amount of chatter that you get before the roleplay starts and after the roleplay that you kind of can't do to the same extent when you're all sitting in a voice chat.
But there's also that funny thing, like with Steve, who's a stream manager on one of some of the series that we do here. Like there's a tone in his voice when he's not quite sure what to do as a player, or he's a bit skeptical about the course of actions that we've chosen to take, and like kind of like a right. That now I feel like because I've been listening to him and his reactions for so long, now I possibly even pick up better on those subtle vocal cues that maybe I'd have missed if we were doing it in person. So there's a kind of strange, one sense is it doesn't work, so you have other sentence maybe
like a daredevil, fictional daredevil.
What I'm saying is, I am a GM daredevil. That's me. That's me.
Always how I've thought of you.
I think it's kind of the thing of you have less overall information, but that means you can focus on the information you're given, if that makes sense.
And like Chris, how does that relate to like you've been streaming with people, so you can see the people, but you haven't met them in person? Do you kind of feel it's the same thing, or does the camera make up for that a bit with players that you haven't really played with much before?
It was interesting earlier hearing about it not feeling like socialization, and I do kind of gel with that a bit. And while we do spend some time kind of enjoying other video games together, or just kind of sitting in stream chat and mucking around together, the sensation I have when I do these groups is more akin to, and I'm just going to lay this out. I don't mean to offend anyone. It's more akin to a late night work meeting than it is akin to kind of pints with the lads or the role play sessions I engaged in as a child. There's definitely more of and a part of that is we are streaming, so it is a performance rather than a bit. Yeah, there's a performative element to it. But yeah, that would be where I sit on the matter.
I kind of feel like it's more like a kind of like club where the thing that you're going there to do is you want to do the thing, and the people you have there are like kind of more like your club friends, and not necessarily, it's not the same feeling as when you're sitting down and having a drink with someone or go around someone's house for a meal. It's more like, let's do this activity together, and I don't need to like perfectly gel with you. We'd have to be, soulmates for that to work. We can still have really fun doing this activity together. Which kind of makes it sound like we all hate each other, but like, but that's obviously not what we're saying.
And I think Chris has a slightly different take on that as well, because pretty much all of the roleplay you've done over the past year has been with us on stream, right? Do you have like your own social roleplay?
I mean, let's be fair, over the last maybe decade, this is the first time I've been role-playing in a long while.
Yeah.
Fair.
I think it's I think one thing that's worth noting when we talk about socialization and stuff like that is, even more so than a lot of hobbies, roleplay really has a very wide variety of comfort with socialization within the hobby itself. Obviously, it's not unique to role-playing, but because of the kind of people who tend to role play. Before we started rolling on this, I think I referred to role play as improvisation for introverts. And there is a truth to that for sure. Although you tend to get some very kind of vociferous, loud people doing it, and some very quiet people as well. And I think we may touch on that later when we talk about making the leap between offline and online. But it's worth noting that is definitely something that's exacerbated by online. In that a GM, I am absolutely sure that a GM will find it harder online, by and large, to make sure everyone is included at the same rate. But there are things you can do to mitigate that, which we'll talk about later. So moving forwards, another thing that could be generally seen as a con for online role playing, we've already touched on this a little bit, and that's the logistics of it, right? So unlike in person, where the equipment you need is you, and the group as a whole tends to need some supplies, dice, whatever, yada yada. To do it online, everyone for a start needs a device to do it on. Everyone needs software or access to browser communications or whatever, and everyone also definitely needs a mic, unless you're doing the typey stuff. But let's not touch on that, because I don't think anyone here has any experience with it.
Not particularly.
Yeah. And you probably need a cam as well, or it would be good to have a cam. And obviously, beyond anything else, that's a bigger monetary barrier for entry than just sitting around with your friends. But also it can lead to all kinds of tech problems. And obviously, role-playing, generally speaking, leans towards larger groups, and tech problems are always multiplied by a larger number. The more people you have, the more tech problems you have. I can see... Yeah, it's just how we have it. And there can also be a real sense of disconnect if the sound and visuals aren't of a generally unified level. Like it always really stands out if, there's four of you, and like we are, generally good sound quality, generally good cam, and there's one of you who, as Justin alluded to as well, doesn't have a cam, or someone who, and you're like, yeah, and it's by no means those people's fault, but it can lead to a sense of disconnect, and
or a physical disconnect.
Yes, absolutely. And I know, we, myself and John, have an offline group that's been running all year, and we've had different people have had tech issues all the way through the year on that. So I know John will have some opinion on that. In fact, at the very beginning of the stream, we kind of alluded to a situation like that we've had on stream with John, right? With your mic fuzz that's now fixed.
Yep.
So, John, why don't you launch into this for us?
I don't even know where to start. Like, I think in the past year, it's been especially difficult because we've all moved online. So everyone wants a camera and a microphone. So there have been no cameras and microphones. And all of the prices have like quadrupled, thousandths or whatever. So the past year has been particularly bad. But yeah, I have friends that I would have loved to roleplay with. Not even in the last year, but I couldn't because they lived in a rural area and had internet that only worked when the moon was in the right place in the sky, for example. And it just wasn't reliable. So it limits the people you can roleplay with. And if everyone turns up and is ready for a roleplay, and then about half an hour in, just as you're about to go into combat initiative, someone's computer crashes, it is the most anticlimactic thing ever, and it sucks so bad. And it has happened.
And you know, I remember like we're talking with Neil from our Vampire stream about his really nice webcam which he got, and I was just like, that's really good. And actually, you know, now it's like I think when he got it, it was around the 40 to 60 price mark, and now it's the 140 to 60 price mark. And like that's more than most people spend on role playing games. Like if you're like, you know, if you don't have a job and you're like a teenager playing role playing games with your friends, you might spend, you know, one of you is probably spending like 80 quid of, you know, mum and dad's money on role playing game books a year, but the rest of them are probably buying a set of dice, if that, and then maybe a chip in together for a book and snacks when it actually comes around. Like, you know, so you don't have to do everything really, you know, high quality, but just the outlay is probably much more than you spend, unless you're getting into like, you know, some nice serious hobbies like, I don't know, collecting miniatures or you know, doing other stuff like that. It does change like what the costs of doing the hobby are, you know.
And there's kind of a, if you've got a really like an alright cam, sometimes that can be listening to someone with a I can kind of understand them mic for like a couple of hours every week for 6 months is, for just one session it would be fine, but over a longer period of time it just brings like the overall standard of the campaign down, because every time they say something you have to go, sorry? And
it can be. We will talk about how fatiguing online play can be in just a little while, and that definitely plays into that. Chris, as someone who's mainly done online role play this year through the medium of our streams, and fortunately we have a generally good standard of equipment for those. Not to toot our own horn, we prepared. Have you found that element of it hitting you in any way, or is it just, you know, if there aren't any issues, are there just no issues?
I haven't felt the tech issues being intense. I mean, there's a point there is that we raised kind of in our document. We were kind of hashing this out before. We were talking about the lack of not having access to resources as a con, but I actually feel like in terms of how the campaigns I've been involved with here are, and that's just basically Symbaroum, the access to the materials and the pictures coming up and that work is, I mean, it's a world apart. It's much better than what we used to get with just kind of homebrew campaigns. What I will say though is I am missing the kind of totemic quality of the physical rule books being passed around, and that's something. I mean, the good thing is that there's virtual copies going around, which means everyone kind of has a copy of the core book in one way or another, and that means I have actually read the full core book, or at least the bits I'm allowed to read as a player. But there's less of a gravitas to not having those things. And I do kind of miss that. That's a definite con for me, is not having the physical artifact.
I absolutely agree, and I think that it gets talked about a lot with board games, the tactility of them and the pleasure that comes from that. But we don't ever talk enough about that aspect of role-playing games, especially ones that feature dice or cards and that kind of aspect of it. And it's definitely, even though people can still use them at home, I feel like it's somewhat reduced, especially by the sense of, for example, everyone watching a dice roll. And that element of kind of a tense moment or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, I grew up obviously with a lot of the World of Darkness systems, and in my house, in my room, the World of Werewolf kind of 10-year edition with the beautiful kind of golden claw mark on the front was actually a holy book to me. Basically, it was kept in such high regard. It had silver inlaid paper as well. I wouldn't even play with it. I just kind of read it and keep it kind of separate and sacred. Maybe I'm a bit strange like that, but you cannot deny that, especially with something like Symbaroum, which is so setting heavy and so beautifully illustrated, the companies, the creators lean into this visual artifacts kind of culture as much as we accidentally do.
They absolutely do, and especially nowadays with the way the industry has gone over the last 20 years, it's much more expensive and difficult to produce a role-playing game nowadays, I think, than it was 20 years ago. And I think the way, as with many hobbyist pursuits, that role-playing companies have lent into that is to produce prestige products. And you get that more, like how role-playing games look now compared to how they looked 20 years ago, with the possible exception of White Wolf, who were always kind of industry leaders in that regard. It's night and day.
But there's also that recent a game that you're playing, the Forbidden Realms game, whatever it was called, that looks quite nostalgic. But there's loads of things I've written down loads of notes. I'm going to catch back up. But what you just said, like, don't you think that's also a shift in like the philosophically what role playing games are about, especially from kind of like pre-millennia, where often the goal was often there were lots of these systems like GURPS, where it would be like, can we make the most universal game that you can play? How can we bring guns and space travel into D&D and steampunk and everything, and the rules can do everything? And now, philosophically, what the system is much more about is going, we have made a system where you can run Star Wars in as teddy bears, and we have all the rules for that, and that you can do anything you want to in this game. We don't want to do that anymore. What role-playing games are about now is going, let's do one thing really well and capture the mood of it really well. Like the Alien role-playing game. It's not saying this is a role-playing game where you can do anything. It's saying this is the best way that you can capture the feeling of the Alien movies in a role-playing game. And that philosophical shift from trying to go, we're trying to make a system where the limits are up to you, to going, you can be endlessly creative, but like, here is a way that we can take all the work out of it for you, and you could just have a really good experience the way you want to have from the role-playing game industry.
Yeah, and I thoroughly agree with that, and I think that's led to the kind of prestige product sort of approach, which in turn leads to that element of it maybe being sapped a bit from online play due to, as Chris, very good choice of word, totemic. It becomes, it's like dice in role playing have become almost a kind of fetishistic thing that role players do. They get really expensive dice for a particular campaign, and then for that campaign they're color themed and all the rest of it. So and we are losing out on that, I think, via the online play. I want to move forward from logistics so we can cover everything else. But Jonny, did you have anything you wanted to throw in the ring with like logistics and software and all that?
It's only similar to what other people have said, really. But like I said, we've been using Discord, and the amount of weeks where at least one person has just disappeared, and then we've got a message saying, "Oh, Discord's kicked me out," and then you're waiting 5 minutes for them to come back. Meanwhile, you're obviously already then in the middle of another conversation because you're not carrying on the game, and then they come back and there's 5 minutes more of conversation, and it's kind of like, you lose a lot of, if you've got a set time that you're playing from until, because people have families and whatever, other responsibilities, then you kind of lose a bunch of your actual role-playing time. And I think in, the 2 to 2.5 hour sessions, we maybe do an hour, because there's a catch-up at the start, because we've been meeting up weekly for 6 years for me, and more for some of them. So it's kind of like, you do want to have a catch-up at the start and see how everybody's doing. So you lose half an hour there, and then you lose other chunks of it. That half an hour's always been there. When we were meeting up in person, that half hour was there. But then from then, the other 2 hours was sort of solid.
Those tech issues just start sapping time.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Jonny, as well. Because do you rely on maps a lot when you do your kind of role-playing games, or do you normally not use any maps at all?
It varies. What I'd started doing in the D&D game that Matt was involved in is I had joined the Patreon for my friend Johnny Hodgson, who did a lot of the One Ring artwork. And I was... This is slightly off topic, but that almost started steering my game in a certain direction, because I would go, oh, there's a cool map. That kind of fits into this, but I need to change my story slightly to fit that in there.
This is very good, but if I could insert myself there for us to hold off on precisely this discussion, because it's definitely going to fit one of the points later a bit more.
Cool.
Where we're going to talk about kind of online tools.
All right.
Okay.
Fine.
But yes, in terms of the difficulties, I think it's just the ones that I have had have been more a time loss issue than anything else, I think.
Well, the reason I brought it up, I'll be brief, is that Matt's style of role-playing game is very much not. It doesn't use maps even when we're doing tabletop around the table role-playing game. So I don't think you've appreciated how much that shift is from being able to just draw what's going on in front of the players on a whiteboard or something, to having to then do it with a mouse and clicker, which happened last week in our game with John, where someone said, I just need to understand what the layout of this map is, and go, okay, well, I have to then get the mouse out and do that logistically is a big difference between playing on the table and playing on the computer.
Yeah. So something else, we're going to basically, almost everything we bring up from now on, we're going to be we've touched on this slightly already, but we have touched on this slightly already. And that's, let's talk about atmosphere, which is something that not all groups want to put much time and investment in anyway. It very much depends on what kind of game you're doing, what style of GMing you're doing, and, kind of beer and pretzels games, style games probably don't focus on it quite as much. But for me, a stalwart GM raised on a 90s diet of storytelling, it has been horrible to try and build atmosphere and theme and mood without, in some cases, physical props, but in my case, particularly music, which is my primary atmospheric storytelling tool. If I have to run Vampire and I can't put Sisters of Mercy and Joy Division on in the background, I'm fucked. It's obviously not entirely, but it's just it's very damaging. I genuinely feel. Obviously, that's my perspective as a GM who's very keen on it, but I'd be fascinated to know from players, and obviously this is a difficulty as well that the streams will always have. Because for very obvious reasons, especially now, we can't play music in the recognizable music in the background of streams. And there's also other stuff to do. Obviously, you've got props. I've been known to have slideshows for some of my games. Although that's actually a thing I could still do, obviously with online play. So I'm going to fling this to Justin first, because I know Justin is a guy who likes his props as a GM. What's your take on this?
I think so for me, I tend to go either all in with atmosphere or not do very much. And basically, when I go all in, it's for my one-off Cthulhu type things, and then I'll buy physical props and draw maps and the rest of it. But I think so. I've missed out a bit on that in terms of the kinds of games I've been running, and mostly because I try to take advantage of going online by making a game that would require basically zero prep, and that was my thing. So this year I haven't really done very much in terms of that, but I have had something in mind where I think one of the big things is you're working in a different medium, And so you need to think about the advantages in the medium and the disadvantages of the medium. And I think that often being forced to go online, you can kind of feel like, well, I'm just going to move what I do online, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think that there is something different about choosing to go online. Like I've really, the game I kind of wanted to do as my special this year, but I just never planned, was I kind of wanted to do a role-playing Cthulhu adventure where I would make a series of blogs and fake email accounts and things like that, and have the players have to search through a series of like really accessible, Googleable artifacts. And I was planning on streaming it even maybe and having them, but then I was thinking like maybe people at home would also find the clues or hack the website that I'd done. So I'd done logistical issues like that. But that would, so like I think there are ways that we could integrate digital tools better, but I think it requires a real conceptual shift about what role-playing games are in a digital format.
I agree. Oddly, what you reminded me of there isn't actually a role playing thing, but it's a rough equivalent. There is an oldish now MMO called The Secret World. That's a kind of spooky paranormal investigation thing, and as part of some missions, some missions are very investigation focused, and they built websites. Where your investigator would, using an in-game browser, go to this website and investigate. And it was a genuine website that existed, and it's a fascinating idea to do that in a role-playing setting. As more dedicated players, John and Chris. You know what? Let's start with John. John is very familiar with my offline campaigns and specifically like the use of music, and he's also familiar with Justin's campaigns and the use of props.
Yes.
As a player who's had these kind of barraged at you, have you noticed a difference?
Yes.
Not having them there.
Yes. The weekly World of Darkness without the Sisters of Mercy has not been quite the same.
I would just like to dive in and say I don't only use the Sisters of Mercy, because that would make me a cliche.
No, there's also some Ongo Bongo.
Sometimes there is Ongo Bongo.
Yeah, and we sort of tried to experiment with it because we did an offline one shot at Halloween, and we had a Spotify playlist, which was great. Unless you've got the free version of Spotify, in which case you'd have this eerie, discordant track, and then 10 seconds of the next K-pop single as an advert, and then eerie, discordant, whatever.
Just as a GM as well, because I tried to listen to it, like I made the Spotify and then gave it to everyone, and then I didn't use it because I found that having the music, over my headphones while I was trying to listen to people, definitely not the same as having the music in the room and talking to people. So just doesn't
very definitely
work too much.
And I do, because I can't give all the credit to just the GMs. As a player, I also use props. I play a Malkavian with a little plastic skull, and it's been sad to not have my little companion or whatever other visual aid I want to use. And I probably could do something for online, but it's not quite the same because I have to constantly keep it in shot, and it's just a faff, and that's kind of the thing. It's possible. It's possible to do these things,
but more of a hassle for sure. Jonny, I don't know. I kind of don't know how you do things offline, because the only offline stuff I've been in of yours was kind of recorded for our old channel, and I don't know what kind of stuff you use. So from your perspective as a GM, has this impacted you, or?
In terms of, like I'd said, this might have been the bit that you were potentially talking about as moving on to, but I kind of changed to using the maps that I'd got from the Patreon account, because previously I would quite frequently do as Justin had said and sort of go, this is the layout, because I am quite a theatre of the mind kind of GM and player. I'm happy if somebody's doing that. If you've got handouts and maps, then great, but I'm not somebody who would necessarily use like miniatures or that kind of thing for even for D&D combat. I'd rather say this person's within your range, they're 25 feet away or whatever, then kind of go whole hog and go, he's in this square and you're in this square. That's fine if people want to run it like a mini war game, but that's not kind of how I enjoy doing it. So in terms of the D&D game that I've been running, it's kind of changed in that way that I have started to use maps, just because otherwise I have to make those maps myself if people want to know the layout. So I've kind of been doing Theatre of the Mind for the majority of it, but then we've got Roll20 accounts set up for if I've got a combat or, you know, a set encounter, then we can see how everything's laid out. And it's for that purpose more than sort of specific combat rules or whatever. But you know, I really like running kind of spooky horror games. And when we moved my other group online at the kind of, I think it was in April, the game that we were going to have, we just finished a game, fortunately, but the one that we were going to run, Nick, who was going to run it, decided that it was a new system and kind of a new story, and he didn't want to run that online. So I kind of said, oh, shall I just run a couple of silly little one-shot things? And they were very silly. And, you know, I would have liked to run maybe a horror thing, but I didn't feel comfortable that I would be able to properly convey the mood online, because I'd not really done any running of games online. I feel like now I will be able to, but at the time, because I'd not done any running of anything online, I didn't know quite how it was going to be, and I was worried that a lot of that would get lost. Even in terms of, if you're in the same room as people, you can set the lighting level, you can make sure that everything's quiet around you, and these are all things that online, when everybody's separate, you don't have control. You don't have you don't have full creative control over the situation as you would if everyone was in your living room.
Yeah, and as you know, a lot is made over the years as GM as director, or GM as you know, screenwriter, or whatever these things. And just as it would be very difficult for a film director to maintain, you know, if they didn't have control over their environment, I couldn't agree more. It's I mean, anyway, I despise a loss of total control over everything anyway. So there we go. Chris, as someone who also came up doing this stuff through the 90s with its horrible, horrible fixation of role-playing meaning something, have you, returning after a long break to role-playing and not having those tools available, has there been any element of it jarring to you?
It does seem like we're from different worlds. I'm seeing a kind of spectrum here as I'm kind of mapping all this stuff out of my head, and I see that kind of American style TTRPG, which is basically a war game. It's very much miniature, very much Roll20, very much environmentally focused, hexes on the table, and very strict rulesing. And then on the other hand, we have very much, as was mentioned, theater of the mind stuff, where there is prop work and there is environmental stuff on the table, quite literally. I come from, and I have a funny feeling, I think it's due to the fact that my roleplay community has always been LARPers, involved in various different systems. And frankly, when LARPers run tabletop role-playing games, they don't use props. They don't use any kind of additional ephemera, because there's enough of that in the big games. And I think I'm in a situation where I've never been really in a game, certainly not where someone has brought a prop out on the table, or certainly not where, I mean, music's featured, and sometimes lighting is featured, but there's never been that kind of more ghost story-esque feel. For me, it's always been a bit more kind of maybe adventure story, if we're sticking with the story metaphor, and less atmosphere, more role with two L's playing.
Yeah. So for you, it's probably not too much of a jarring thing, but I think for a lot of people it will be the same way. Like I know I've talked to people before, and I talk about using music, because as I've probably belabored now to the extreme, I use it a lot, and they've kind of gone, why on earth would you use music? but surely some of your players won't like that music and it'll really jar for them. And I've gone, you know what? That's never occurred to me.
Yeah.
You don't want to play with those kinds of people.
No. I think, different people are different. I think it's more that such a person would not enjoy my role playing than that they are unfit for it.
Yeah, I think you have the advantage that you're playing 90s goth music to goths from the 90s.
Yeah, by and large.
In terms of the Halloween games that I've been in with you, it's been atmospheric music, and it fits as more of a film score than songs. So it's relatively inoffensive in terms of I don't feel like somebody could listen to what you put on at Halloween this year and go, I hate that, because it's just kind of backing creepy music. And
I'd certainly think it would be unusual for someone who's specifically into tabletop role playing to dislike general atmospheric music. Let's hop forward, and again, something we've already kind of brought up, and this is the idea that online role playing, and it's not a universal rule, I think will tend to be more tiring, more fatiguing socially and mentally, and perhaps even physically, than role playing in person. I know it definitely is for me, and I think that there's a couple of things to talk about here. One is that obviously for some people this will be far more of an issue than for others. People who already have, for example, fatigue and other related energy or physical ailments, but also perhaps for people who have kind of more social conditions who will find it harder to engage and more work to engage with people online, and therefore could find it more tiring. I think, John, you've already kind of alluded to this, so why don't you? Is there anything you want to add beyond what you've already said?
I would say I find online role playing. I don't find it socially fatiguing, but I don't find it as socially refreshing as in-person roleplay. When you have The Sims and you do a social interaction, and then sometimes your bar goes up and there's like 2 green pluses because it's really social. Role-playing online isn't 2 green pluses the way that role-playing in person is.
Sure.
Is the only way I can think of to explain it. I do find role-playing online more physically fatiguing, just because, I'm spending several hours in this chair. And when I'm not role-playing, I'm playing video games and spending several hours in this chair. Whereas when we're role-playing in person, I'm moving around and I'm visiting other people. So I do tend to find that when we have a weekend of role-playing, then I ache because I don't move, because I just sit here. So yeah, I think there's social fatigue, there's mental fatigue, and there's definitely an amount of physical fatigue from just not moving like you should because you're plugged in for several hours. But some of us just do that anyway because we're nerds.
Yeah.
Tough, strong language from John there.
Yeah. I don't know that this necessarily needs thorough discussion unless anyone kind of disagrees. But has anyone got anything else they want to add to what John and I have said there?
I think this goes along the lines of there is a spectrum of the introvert and extrovert personality. For me, I'm actually as happy horizontal in bed doing role play as I am kind of actually traipsing through the back streets of various cities in the UK trying to find houses to go to scheduled weeks for. I think and honestly, I think one of the interesting things will be to see not what happens during these great periods of lockdown and strife, but what happens after them. Is this going to become a more keen way of operating? Is the imprint left by the big online role-playing streamers and groups now going to become something that people get introduced to roleplay by and grow up in completely different community spaces that is alien to us?
in exactly the same way that online play of video games has become, the serpent eating its own tail, in that I think very few people, perhaps being raised on video games now, maybe even have any desire to play kind of long form single player games, because it's the media experience. Justin's doubting me, but I would also say he's not 12, so maybe he doesn't know. I mean, I'm not either.
Let's be very freaking clear.
But I am referencing things things I've read and articles and stuff. I'm not saying no one does, but I think nowadays, if you're raised in the digital age, right, and you're used to things being done in video games in a multiplayer capacity and streaming and that kind of parasocial relationship, it seems part of the package to you, maybe. So the experience of all getting together and doing it might almost seem quaint. I don't know.
Well, while we're doing back in my day, one thing I will say is that, the thing has changed in that, you're very, you don't got that experience anymore of playing a video game without being able to look up how to beat the boss. That's completely changed. But yeah, in terms of this specific question, I found it so much easier running games online and playing games online. I think most of that is because I am a very I'm very big on hosting, and I put a lot of effort into cleaning my entire house, and then getting food ready and drinks ready, and then making sure everyone's got their drinks and all the rest of it. And when I do role playing games, even though I'm running the game, I'm still also hosting, and I find it very difficult. And that's just my personality. I find it very difficult. And any of you come around my house before for anything, that's what I'm like. And so I find it very difficult to switch off and just GM when I'm hosting in my house. And so I think doing this online, I kind of feel like I can just rock up for a session, having done the prep a day or two ago, and that for me is very refreshing.
Sorry.
I was going to say, how would you compare it to hosting roleplay in someone else's house? Because you have done that.
I have done that, and I think that the hosting roleplay in someone else's house is my least of the favorite options, because I don't get to control, because it has the tabletop,
it's the environment again.
Yeah, you don't get to control the environment, so I can't do the setup and when I ran. So I for example, I ran a Halloween story at Matt's house with last year, and I ran the same story at my house just a few weeks before with my own writing. And one of the things that I did when I was and one of the things in the story is the introduction of fae or fairies later on in the game. And at my house, in the third act of the story, I had hidden fairy lights all over the room, and I switched them on in the third act. And before that, the rest of the room was candlelit, and then it became like that. And then I can build up a lot of this. By the way, is all inspired by Matt's excellent role playing over the years that I've been in, and to up my game. But when I was at Matt's, I couldn't do that, so I couldn't control the environment so much. But then I also had to travel, and then I had to I couldn't really go to Matt oh, do you mind? I've got this bit coming up, so do you mind if you just do this in your house? It's least favorite option. But still good, still enjoyable.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that, and I think one thing I'd add, just as a personal, my version of what Justin's just said, I would say that though I would say running online is more fatiguing for me, it is less stressful. Because, like you say, the tidying, the making sure everything's set up, the making sure that sometimes if there's snacks or these kinds of things, there's less to do with that. Jonny, what's your take on this?
I think, everybody is spending a lot of time at their devices at the moment, aren't they? Their computer. So it's the difficulty is exacerbated by the fact that everybody is working at the same computer that they're role playing at. Probably, I'd imagine they are. Most people probably are. So I sit here all day, and then I go and cook my tea, sit in the living room and watch something for half an hour, and then I come back here to run my game. So it doesn't. I think, as John said, it doesn't have that kind of refreshing feeling. Previously, I would sit at my computer in an office, and then I would go to wherever the game is running, and then I would come home, and it's three separate things as opposed to all here. And I think I know there is the research into actual Zoom fatigue, as it's being called, but I don't necessarily feel that I am suffering from that. It's more the constant state of this position.
And this is, I think this is nothing new. It's that working from home quandary that people have had.
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely advantageous for your own energy levels and your own sense of compartmentalization to be able to separate out your work environment from your leisure environment. And the problem with online role playing is it basically has all the trappings of a work environment, at least for someone who works on a computer.
I quite like the working from home thing if I could then go out and do my other activities instead of also doing those at a computer. That's the kind of the trade-off for me. You know, if I were able to go to somebody else's house or even into my living room to do role playing with a group of people instead of, I mean, I could move my computer around, obviously, but it's still the same computer, and I load it up and my work emails ping up because that's what my computer does. And it's kind of that rather than specifically role playing online for me, it's the constant of both environments.
Yeah, there's no variation, there's no break. Absolutely. And as just a last point on it, it's pretty undeniable that armchairs and couches are comfier than desk chairs.
I did make a joke when we were talking about this before that pros are you can be a filthy gremlin and never change out of your pajamas, but the cons are sometimes role play is the only reason you have to leave the house and change out of your pajamas, and without it you just sort of
a gremlin in filthy pajamas.
Too real, frankly, too real.
So the last thing we've got on these cons of online play, and I'm going to let Jonny take the lead on this because he's one of the ones who suggested it, and I didn't really consider it, but on the first go round of these bullet points, but he's absolutely right, and that is distractions, which was also brought up by Neil, who folk will know from Vampire. Household distractions. While you're on a distraction machine. Jonny.
Certainly in the games that I've been running. I mean, obviously for this, so that I don't have to get up, I've left the window open in literally the middle of winter to allow the cats to come in without me needing to get up and let them in, as unfortunately we don't have a cat flap, and the other option is they sit meowing right there, which would probably come through to the stream as well. So there's things like that. I'm sort of, my kitchen is round there, which is where my washing machine and my dishwasher are, so if either of those, you know, stupidly by me get put on at 6:30 when I'm not thinking and on autopilot, and then at 7 o'clock I come to do something here and I get the spin cycle running behind me, that can be very distracting. Also, you know, I'm very aware that you're literally sat at your computer with a web browser, and it's very difficult to tell whether people are sort of, they're looking directly at the screen and you don't know whether they're paying attention to you or scrolling through their Facebook feed. And I'm sure people probably aren't, but there's that kind of thing of, are they? And, you know, I don't hold it against anybody if they are, because that's what those platforms are designed to do, damn them. But it does get, if you're sat around a table with people won't take out their phone and look at it because it's rude to be looking at something else while you're talking, right? But when you're on the device already,
many times they will, unless you set a rule about it, which I have gone. Not because I'm some weird I am a weird Gen X grouch, but like, not because I'm like, oh, young people on their mobile phones, just because it's like, pay attention. You know, I've done a lot of work for this.
I kind of feel like people on their phones is worse than being on a browser, because I think, like, my experience as a role player is if you go on browser during a role playing game that they're doing online, they kind of only like look at one page or something that they're doing for one thing, and then they come right back to it. Whereas the phone is such a more detrimental device, I think, to concentration. I don't know what it is. Just as a thought.
For me,
you know, at the very least, when they have a phone, it's obvious they're not paying attention. which
That's
is
what I was going to
means
say.
they're
Yeah,
less disruptive to the group. I guess that's it. Yeah.
I just want to highlight for those of us who might be watching this later on YouTube that Jonny's literally the middle of winter joke is incredibly pertinent. That is his one day after the solstice, and that joke will only land twice, like once a year, and that's just really great work.
Yeah.
So props for that.
thanks, Chris.
I am aware
Thank
that
you.
while we're
Yeah,
streaming
thank you.
this, Jonny is probably freezing because it is cold outside here in the north
I have
of
my
England.
Zelda Christmas jumper on, so I'm all right.
Oh,
That's
very nice.
amazing.
It's all right.
I didn't know it was Christmas jumper special. I'd have worn mine.
Oh well, there we go. It's
Matt's
either
wearing
Christmas
his as well,
jumpers, either Christmas jumpers or very niche early 2000s alternative.
It's
metal band
always
t-shirts.
niche rock band T-shirts for you. like that. You're for you. It's like Christmas all year round.
Yeah, this is especially special. Completely off topic. This because if anyone's really familiar with the British metal act Earth Tone 9, with my hair and these glasses, I am already effectively cosplaying as the lead singer with this mighty beard. So that's extra special. That's
That
the
could be
effort I put in
series
for you guys. Yeah,
Series 4 on the stream could be the adventures of the Earth Tone 9 singer played by Matt. Yeah.
Like I don't have any. I don't have any children responsibilities. But we do have lots of us have pets
Yes.
or partners that occasionally things like something will explode next door and like I might need to fix it or do something about it or get rid of a spider or something. Luckily that hasn't happened yet. But any minute these kinds of things could interrupt my day, and I do wonder whether being online makes it easier to deal with, like, say, for example, cat disasters. I don't know if any have happened on stream, for example, or anything, but
not on stream. In role-playing sessions, yes.
all the time.
about a month ago, I was literally halfway through my opening sentence of a session, and this young man here, who you can see on the armchair, I was there kind of trying to set atmosphere for a werewolf, an offline werewolf session we were doing, and as I did so, I just heard a.
Don't need to do the sound. You don't need to do the sound.
I mean, I said, we are talking about this in offline content, but he would equally happily have done it offline. Usually at the center of everyone, he would have.
But do you think Jinx is less stressed? Jinx is the cat's name. Sorry for giving away personal information of people who aren't involved in the streams. I know that's
Jinx's
a big
name
no-no.
is fine. I don't think people can hunt me down by that.
Exactly. Do you think Jinx is less stressed because people aren't coming over as often? Like, there's less, there's not like 6 people popping over.
Absolutely is, yes. Particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, yes. He got very antsy with just the company of people in the house. Who didn't? Yeah, absolutely. I'm just conscious of the time, and we've talked about the cons of online play quite a lot now. So what we're going to do, just for a couple of minutes here, before we talk about the pros, we've had a couple of people dropping comments and questions and the like, and John, who is basically stream managing this for us, is just going to pop them up for us. If you do have any comments or questions you want us to address, please do throw them in there, and specifically right now, if you have anything about the cons of online play. John, what have we got?
We've got. Am I popping them up? Yeah, I'm popping them up.
Yeah, pop them up.
Pop them up.
Pop them up. Yeah. This from Steve, stream manager of Vampire the Masquerade. Yeah, certainly an emotional toll to joining what amounts to a conference call, at least until things settle down and get rolling. There really is. I am one of these people who finds phone calls stressful. I don't like using the phone, and that's definitely less so in terms of online stuff. But there's a certain degree. For example, when I was briefly playing, I briefly was a player into campaigns this year, which I don't usually do, and had to quit both of them because of constraints on my time. But when I was, interestingly, one was run by Jonny and one was run by Justin. I never joined until I saw multiple people in the chat.
I don't understand that.
Because I didn't want the social stress of having to awkwardly say hi to one person when I was hanging out with lots of people that evening.
I was just about to say that it's a recurring joke in the roleplay that Justin runs that I'm in. That isn't a joke because it's 100% true. Because Justin will always be on time, and then no one will join. Everyone is always like 15 minutes late because no one wants to be alone in the chat with Justin.
With me.
We love
That's what you're saying, though.
Justin.
That's what you're saying, though.
So
You're like,
much.
I'm always like,
But we
why?
don't
Because
want to
like
get
you're just
stuck in
like,
a call with him.
I
But
don't
then
want to
one
just be on the
person
phone with.
joins,
Yeah.
One person joins, and literally within like 3 seconds, the other 5 people turn up.
Yeah,
It's like
because they were lurking and watching. Weirdly,
This makes me look so bad.
if I'm playing a video game, with a bunch of people, fine. But role play, I don't know what it is. It's more like a phone call because I haven't got something to focus on my people. I don't know what it is.
I think
Anyway,
it's also particularly the slight stress of like you always have that small talk, and this past year it's been, "How's your week been?"
Terrible.
Yeah.
The world is ending.
yeah. Next, please, John.
It's next. We've got a comment about atmosphere.
I paused. This is from Will Kidby. I paused my Siraz. I'm not
It
sure.
was Strahd.
Strahd.
We realised we couldn't figure out the spelling.
Yeah. Strahd, D&D, Ravenloft, yes. Campaign for lockdown because I can't do atmosphere how I want over the web. Yeah, agreed. I would do the same thing. He says, having started 2 ongoing atmospheric horror games on that everyone in the world can watch. But it's a stream, it's different. I kind of couldn't do that. But I have also, for example, suspended my long-running Vampire the Masquerade offline game, partially because of some people not wanting to do it online, but also partially because we're so invested in it that doing climactic moments of it online wouldn't feel right. It just wouldn't feel right. So yeah,
I think like what's changed with this atmosphere thing is online it does shift to it's more like the whole group's responsibility to curate the atmosphere, and I think that is actually a detriment because I think in all of the games I run, we have too much fun to take that responsibility seriously. Like even like the vampire game, I am constantly catching myself, especially in the Twitch chat, like making jokes that if I made in the talk would just derail the game. Not because they're so funny, but because they are terrible. Like,
and in many ways, that the stream makes that easier because you have an outlet for it that isn't.
That's true.
Out loud.
It's true. We have a handy hint about background music on streams.
There's a chess streamer that plays music on stream, but when he puts the VOD on YouTube, the music is not there. Not sure how he does it, but it's possible. 42. Yes. I saw that comment and I briefly racked my brains around about it on mute about how they might be doing that. I think what they're probably doing is recording they're at the same time they're streaming, they're recording a video file, sans the music, and then they put that on YouTube. Or wherever their VODs go. I would imagine that's how they do it. There is software that can strip music off, but it tends to be quite unreliable, and if it doesn't do it right, then you get DMCA hits. So
yeah, the elephant in the room there is this was probably absolutely fine before Twitch started aggressively enforcing DMCA.
That's the thing.
Hi Twitch, we're on you.
It's still really regularly done. It's still really done, but I think also it's a shift in, especially just we're talking about Twitch specifically. I suppose it's a shift between channels that make most of their money through bits and cheers and subscriptions to channels that are looking for other things. So I think if you're relying on those donations, we don't care so much about losing a portion of the revenue from your whatever.
Yes, absolutely, but as Chris has alluded to, that's not the problem anymore. The problem is if you do it, you won't have a Twitch channel now. Because it won't be that those bits are silenced, which is the historical thing that used to happen with it. It's now that literally your account will be struck.
Yep.
Which
is fine because I think there was another point about using royalty-free music.
Yeah, you can absolutely do. And hey, we do our intro music is royalty-free,
which is an absolute bop, might I add. It's a great piece of music.
Yeah,
which leads into the next comment I wanted to highlight.
I love my pelican picture is like
some chump called Drinker Moth here. The downsides are twofold. One is
this is about
a long time looking, and 2, use a cultural attachment the players have to the music.
And that's about open source music.
Yes,
yeah,
that's what it's regarding. So
I think open source music is viable, and I've kind of gone back and forth a bit on whether we should try and use like a background music on stream. Other roleplay kind of actual play streamers, some do use kind of like very low background music, and some don't. And so far we haven't, but I'm open to using it in the future. Is there anything else, John, or shall we leap into headfirst?
That looks like everything.
Okay, let's leap into the pros of online, and not to show a bias, but I suspect this will be quicker. But there are pros, and we've touched on most of them already. So the first one, which we touched on when we talked about logistics, equipment, and software, easy access to dice rollers, character sheet tools, PDFs. Chris, you specifically said stuff about this. Is there anything you want to add to what you originally said? I know, for example, in Simbaroom, you literally have another screen that has, PDFs permanently up and stuff like that.
Stuff, yeah. No, that's been an absolutely fantastic resource, being able to, because it's not, I was talking earlier about having the physical artifacts. The physical artifacts are useless if you can't remember what page the beautiful world map is. But if you can just have a screen cap or another picture up, you can be looking at it all the time while talking through it. So your interactions in character can be more fluid. You can directly reference a town, and generally speaking, you don't have to stop and ask, "Oh, can you remind me the name of X and Y?" I do really like that. Now, I loathe dice rollers, and I'm a detractor from Roll20, and I'm a big fan of actually having physical dice. Again, because they're the artifact, the totemic quality of them is definitely a thing that appeals to me. Yeah, there's other stuff around kind of. I don't want to talk about any of this stuff as a con, because that's not fair. These are pros. It's good to have that stuff there. And another pro, we were talking earlier about, again, the physical copy. When you're playing around a table, there's one, maybe two, maybe three, if you're playing with nerds, physical copies of the source rule book. There is a brokerage system. We all know the brokerage system. Oh, can I look at that? And can I look at that? And it eliminates kind of the opportunity to sit down and study, or to browse, or to go and read up on the flavor text and the background text, which you don't have when you literally have a PDF for the purposes of the campaign open on the other screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and as some people have mentioned in chat as well, the ability to have a searchable PDF.
Yes.
Because I love the role-playing industry by and large. Role-playing designers, obviously very talented people. They are not naturally, if the evidence tells us anything, it is that they are not naturally inclined to structure their products particularly well. With the absolute nadir of that, obviously, and I know Jonny knows some of the people who worked on it. I love the art, I think, but for example, the first printing of One Ring is so cursed that
it's basically unplayable.
That I literally acquired a copy of the second edition, even though there's no different content, just because it was rearranged in an actual sane format.
Yeah. So cursed, it was probably fortune of volcano.
They published a second index a new index for it, which I printed off and just had to never used the original. So yeah, I agree. Long story short is searchable PDFs are really, really great.
Really, really good.
And the thing is, I've wanted to do that for a long time in my tabletop plays with a tablet, but then it's like, then you have to purchase a tablet and all this other rubbish. But having it on computer is all great.
Jonny, as someone who, I know this isn't unique within this group, but in my head, you're a D&D man, right? Because you kind of came at the hobby via D&D, sort of with a sort of D&D centric approach. Yes, no.
I mean, yeah. So D&D was the first thing that I was aware of, although I don't think that's particularly rare. It wasn't the first thing that I played. I think it was the first thing that I ran.
And D&D has been, for whatever other faults you may give them, and again, as a 90s role player, I would say many, but for whatever other faults they have, Wizards of the Coast have always been ahead of the game in terms of digital digital versions of their product. I remember friends of mine having the disc-based D&D handbooks back in the late 90s when it was ridiculous. The only book that came on a disc was Encarta. Encarta and D&D manuals
This is the level of jokes we're going to have. We're going to have like 90s
it's
jokes.
not a joke.
It's true.
It's a genuine truth.
I know it's true, but is it good content?
Like with that there in the background, with all those extra products there, and you know what, it was going to be a future point, but let's work it in. Let's talk about stuff like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, because it seems appropriate to what we're doing with those kind of products in there, and that being like the first thing you ran, and maybe like your route into GMing in that way. Do you think there's been the route into online play has been made easier for you by the more natural access to those like adapted, specific, tailored digital products?
Probably, yeah. In terms of like, obviously, Roll20 is, well, I think it was originally set up with just D&D. There are other things available on it now, but like, I haven't had to. I think you have to pay if you want to run some other things on it. So certainly, if I wanted to run something even slightly more obscure than 5th Ed D&D, I'd have had to shell something out. I've not had to pay anything in order to run these games online and have access to that stuff that's allowing me to do the map stuff that we spoke about previously. Apart from, obviously, I've joined a Patreon, but that's my own choice, and I could make my own maps and put them on. So yeah, I think in that sense, the fact that the main game that I have been running is D&D online, that's certainly been easier. But yeah, and obviously there's the D&D Beyond as well, which is a very useful tool for people figuring things out. So yeah, I think probably in that sense, if I was running anything else, it would have been slightly more difficult.
And although we are not sponsored by any of these different types, I've definitely found so I'm running like Fantasy Flight Star Wars on Roll20, and I feel like now I would want to, after this year, Fantasy Grounds, which has been expanding what they do, they've just expanded into a load of basic, I think, pretty much free or kind of with Fantasy Grounds basic Star Wars, Fantasy Flights, character sheets and tooltips and macros and things like that. But all of that stuff is but like what the difficulty is once your group has settled on a way of doing things online, it's much more difficult than in person. You might go, oh, we're going to use this new way of rolling dice or this new house rule, or we're going to start doing this thing. Whereas online, it's like you can't relocate an entire group to a new software after you've just convinced them to download Discord, and then you've just convinced them to download this dice app, and then you've just convinced them to meet at this time and to get a proper mic and all this other stuff. Once you're fixed, it's much harder to shift around online.
And let's not forget, some of that may have involved expenditure for them as well. I know for I mean, obviously, for the GM, that's obviously often a concern. I know, for example, that Fantasy Grounds have just released their, I mean, it's not exactly a second edition, but their, whatever you want to call it, their sequel to the original Fantasy Grounds, right? Unity, which I believe is a more technologically pretty and adaptable piece of software for them that they've incorporated a lot of. You can get Vampire the Masquerade on, and you can get Symbaroum, you can get various things. Speaking of them, and I don't want to get too embedded on the topic of whether or not to use a tool like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, because I feel that's almost an entire stream that you could talk about for yourself. I know, for example, this year I weirdly also ran Fantasy Flight Star Wars via Roll20, which Justin quietly loathed me for. That's a joke. It wasn't quite.
What, you ran the same game I was running?
I know. But yeah, and for example, I leapt on the chance to use something like that because I thought I'm running online and that's great. And within I'd say 2 or 3 months of it, I left it because I considered it, what it added to the game in terms of convenience, it took away in terms of for me hindering my use of theatre of the mind.
Yeah. I was just going to mention that once again, this caters to the more the when you see TTRPG streams with people with miniatures and stuff. But one thing I really wanted to mention, and this rings a bell in my head, that this stuff is kind of on a spectrum, starting with the GM screen and cheat sheets that would have been handed around going up through like the old D&D character generator on CD-ROM, which I used to play as a video game. I was so bored. And then going all the way up through stuff like Roll20 and through the more modern iterations of tools. The problem is that line ends at just playing Baldur's Gate. The perfect platform and media for playing tabletop role-playing games online is kind of the realized video game version of it. Now, it's not the perfect platform for a GM storytelling, but it's probably the perfect player experience.
And it's hard to, obviously these things don't exist in a vacuum, and there were a lot of considerations, but the statement, the role-playing industry was upended and crashed in the mid-2000s, in great part due to the advent of MMORPGs, is not a controversial one to make, although obviously, as I said, there were other factors at play. But yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't want to get too far into like critiquing these tools, but I think it is a pro broadly for online play that they are available at all. Yeah. Like if you want them, they are there. Before we move onwards, because I'm just conscious of time, but I'm also conscious of not letting people have their say. Jonny, what do the Johns think? Is there anything you want to throw into the mix on this topic?
Not particularly. No, I can think of. I want to shout out that someone in chat put up a very good point in that the trick with them is knowing when not to use them. And I do think that when you first load it up and you sit through the tutorial, then you can go, ooh, I can have a map and all of these miniatures, and then I can do the thing. No, if you are drastically changing your role, unless you're already doing those things, if you are drastically changing your role-playing style in order to use a new toy, then it's valid, but it's not what you were doing before you had it.
It's the old Jurassic Park, isn't it? You were so concerned with thinking about whether you could, you didn't stop thinking you should. And it's the same with any tool, though, isn't it? Right? Like you need to cherry pick the things that work for you.
Yeah.
There are two things for me on that. One is that I am incredibly lazy. And not lazy. I'm incredibly practical, and I have, as I've already said, my reasons that I thought I should use Roll20, which is that I could upload the maps and show people their positions, which I would normally do with a whiteboard. So I went through the instructions until I learned how to do that, and then I stopped the instructions and I went and set the maps up. That also comes from previously having learnt web development and gone, oh, you can do all of these sparkly, shiny, flashy things, and then seen loads of people use the sparkly, shiny, flashy things and gone, nobody should ever use those sparkly, shiny, flashy things. They should make a website with a white background that looks nice and leave everything else alone. So I kind of just, I went for the bare minimum of what it was that I wanted to use it for, because there wasn't any other gap to fill for me.
I have one counterpoint, which is I think the one where this all changes might be with virtual reality and the use of, tabletop simulator or something like it. Because one thing that is very different about that is if you had such a group where you could have that experience with everyone, the ability to incorporate 3D maps into a game, I think, is a massive game changer. And I've seen some groups that have had fantastic Star Wars fights with gangways and their characters firing down on positions and things like that. And a more advanced version of like Tabletop Simulator, where you had a shelf of miniatures and rule sets and things like that, which we've kind of seen some of those things in like some of the downloadable Star Wars games that we've looked at in the past. It could be really, really cool.
I agree, and at least partially. And again, I don't want to just get into Matt complains about maps. But like, I think at least one of the reasons I'm not fond of things like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds broadly, that's nothing but like, if you want to use, we should probably caveat all this by saying we're not saying what isn't valid or good for role playing, just what does work or doesn't work for us as individuals.
Yes.
And I think that like specifically that top down view for me, is really damaging to trying to capture a scene, because it stops the play. For a lot of players, and for myself as a GM, it stops me thinking about the scene in my own terms. In, again, theatre of the mind, I keep coming back to that idea and starts thinking about it purely in terms of like a skirmish board game viewed from above. And that's really the problem with it for me. And now that I've had my say, no, John, finish us off.
I would like to say someone in chat has raised a very, very good point that things like Roll20 and I guess by extension Fantasy Grounds can also take accessibility barriers away from people who have physical disabilities or problems with maps.
Yes,
and
absolutely,
dice or anything.
That was at least partly what I was trying to allude to with, the caveats of obviously these things that work for one person don't work for another person, vice versa. And I absolutely think that one of the things, and it's actually a good segue here, because let's talk about travel, right? And the ability to play with distant folk, because there's obviously the kind of like, I suppose, vanilla stuff for people who are able, and it still allows it. For example, right, Chris lives in a different country from me. I would not be able to play a regular offline game with him. This allows me to do that. Similarly, and this is obviously a little blend of it. Another one of my regular players lives in a much further away country than even Chris does. And he plays with us on stream, and also plays with us even in offline games, just on my TV, like a goddamn Power Rangers character. And we wouldn't be able to do that if it wasn't for the ability to play online. And for people with disabilities or kind of social anxieties or anything like that, the online play is perhaps even the only option realistically. And obviously, the more availability and accessibility those things have, the bigger win is for everyone and the hobby as a whole.
I'd be really interested maybe in 5 or 10 years' time to eavesdrop on another one of these sessions led by people who come to roleplay after this great crisis. Specifically, role-playing, we need to acknowledge not just accessibility, but there is a bit of a culture of gatekeeping. And I think the move to online play and the post big streamer scenario for like these tabletop role-playing games getting thousands, 2,000s, tens of thousands of viewers and Comic-Con panels has altered the shape of what we do and how we maybe drawn attention to how we gatekeep. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how people enter the hobby after this event.
Absolutely. Like whether or not you're a fan of like the kind of bigger, more professionally presented streams, you got your Critical Roles and your LA by Nights and all that stuff. Whether or not you're into that yourself, you can't deny that it has provided, honestly, a much, much needed injection of interest and players into the hobby that was lacking before. I already alluded to the kind of crash in the mid 2000s. Maybe people who weren't around for that or weren't into the hobby then aren't aware of basically the kind of desert of about 10 years that the hobby went through, where it really didn't have anywhere near as much prominence in so the kind of cultural awareness, pardon me, that it did beforehand or since. And those things absolutely is out. And without online play, we wouldn't have that.
Yeah.
Good. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Because again, conscious of the time and moving on and stuff.
I suppose the only thing that we just still now have to deal with, and this has always been true when our foreign players have been like Skyping and things, is time differences, which are not something you have to deal with in round table play, and that normally isn't a problem if everyone's in the same continent, but it's just another thing that I think, like, if we were playing with a different group of people, we might have to worry about somebody playing in the morning or afternoon, whatever, and that could have all kinds of issues with shifting around sessions and things like that.
Yeah, for example, like a West Coast American player probably wouldn't be able to play in a European group unless odd hours being kept one way or the other, etc.
One thing that's kind of linked is that I ran a play test over the summer, which Matt, you were involved in, and it just meant that playing online, it obviously is to do with people being able to play from all over, but if you do need to get a group together for something like that, that's not strictly like a standard role-playing thing, you don't have to get 5 people who live locally to all be available at the same time. You can get 5 people from anywhere who are all available at the same time to be able to play. So it's been handy for that, definitely.
And a point that I think Neil from our vampire stream made, it's all much easier to reschedule. Because of the lack of travel, the lack of setup and tear down, the lack of hosting, etc., etc. Rescheduling it tends to be much less of a problem. Whether that's like moving it back half an hour or moving it to another night or whatever, it tends to be easier. I don't think we've heard from John maybe on this. Is there anything you want to add, John? You might have said something. If you said something truly insightful, I do apologize.
I think I said something, and I highlighted something from chat.
You did.
I highlighted something chat because it was a very good point, but also because I couldn't finish it.
Look, fake moderating is hard, all right? You know what? That's all the pros we had listed, and that I wouldn't say that that's because we are being harsh on online play. I would say that's because we're whizzing through them a little bit quicker now. But also, you know what? We're going to have another pause for comments and questions. So if you have anything specifically to say about the pros of online play, maybe questions about what we've discussed or comments about things you think we missed, then flag them up now. I think it's an interesting angle that we're coming at this discussion from, because it's obviously a great deal of our experience with online play over the last few months has come from streaming, which, again, an entire discussion, roundtable discussion could be had just about role-playing and streaming. We could run through our literal Telling Tales Bible of do's and don'ts.
We
genuinely have.
Our experience of as moving on to streaming has also been, built upon years of other work producing content for online media sources and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just another quick point with like the pros versus the cons. While we spent a lot longer on the cons, they're essentially sort of gripes. They haven't necessarily stopped us playing, whereas the pro of accessibility, if it allows an extra person to play who couldn't otherwise play, absolutely, the cons are almost irrelevant.
They are, and ultimately, if the cons were too much to outweigh the pros, we wouldn't be here having this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
I mean, I'm a man out of time, because the last time I played roleplay, there was one laptop in the house and there was a sudden gasp in awe when it was taken out of its cover. But one of the things I think that will endure in terms of pros is the leaking of these electronic tools into tabletop, specifically searchable PDFs, which is a massive coup.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's going to be the future. I think we're going to need bigger tables, because there'll be a device at least on every table now.
I think here's my old man prediction, right? The next big step in tabletop role playing will mirror. It's a kind of a rare case where board games have been at the front. Board games have been absolutely revolutionized over the past couple of years by apps. Some more than others. Not everyone uses them. Not every game uses them. Not every group uses them. The first role-playing game to properly popular role-playing game to properly utilize an app that effectively carries out all of the non-narrative jobs of the GM for them will pioneer a revolutionary change in the tabletop role-playing industry. There's my prediction for you. And it'll probably be D&D, because it usually is, because they've got the money.
You're looking to a dark future where it's like, okay, Alexa, run Ravenloft.
Yeah.
Flipping egg.
It's just, obviously it's just a Black Mirror episode, but I genuinely do feel that. I think that, and if anything, these streams have taught me with our choice of system, it's that if I can ditch everything but my storytelling, because at the moment we're running things where I either barely have to or don't at all have to roll dice or compare stats or anything, then it's better and easier, especially online. Did we get any comments or questions from the chat regarding pros, John?
I think we generally addressed a lot of it as it came up, but we did have an interesting thing about travel from Azimuth. Just there was a weekend event.
Yeah,
and,
like a digital open game, like a digital open
Yeah,
game sort of thing.
which seems cool.
Yeah.
And
Travel.
possible hinting.
Yeah, sure. That's definitely a thing we could do. And why not tips and tricks videos? Hey, why not get our fantastic faces out there for even more stuff? Well, if there's no further, I did see some comments that came up specifically from Megatron around like disability. I think we kind of covered those. With the talking, I know what we were talking about was somewhat inspired by those comments.
We did.
I'm gonna up on screen.
Pop this one,
Yeah, I'm disabled, and being able to play games online has been fantastic for me. It means I'm more likely to be at a session because I'm not fighting fatigue, pain, whatever, to physically go to a place. Yes, and while I tend to frown on dropping personal information from people on, us on the streams, I have my own health issues, and I found myself, for instance, cancelling sessions a lot less because I can do them online.
Yeah, and travel, I mean, we did mention travel tangentially, but travel and geographical dislocation, both in terms of a pro, because I don't have to walk 2-3 miles home after a session, but also a pro in terms of that geographic dislocation does allow you to involve different players and does allow you even to, in future, maybe expand the game to mechanisms where the story is passed around time zones as well.
Yeah.
It's an enabling factor, not just a labor saving factor.
Yes, absolutely. Again, just conscious of the time. Let's if you've put any extra comments or questions in there, we'll deal with them. We'll do another session at the end for people. This will probably run a little over 10 now, which I'm assuming the people on here are fine with, because they usually run over 10 with me anyway on these streams. So we're going to talk about challenges inherent in moving from offline to online role-playing, which again is obviously something a lot of people have done this year, and I think it does. It was something suggested again by Neil, who very handily provided us a lot of fodder for this discussion, and I think it is definitely a situation with its own unique challenges to just setting up a fresh online game. Number one, I don't know why I've numbered that one. I haven't numbered anything else. It can alter the existing group dynamic, which I think is bad enough. It can literally be a death knell for a campaign. People have different presences online to off. They could be more comfortable in one or the other. So the amount of like introvert, extrovert balance can be thrown off. If some people don't like an online format, you can lose them, or you can have them basically be there, sulking for the year or whatever. I think it can be awful, and it's something that I think, while other things can absolutely affect your group dynamics, I think the switch from offline to online almost certainly will. Jonny, you've had long on running games over the last few years. What have you found in terms of this in yours as you switch this year?
My D&D game kind of changed group, barring 2 people just before all of this kicked off. So it's potentially not been as bad with that as it might have been if it had been a solid group for a year or 2 years and then moved online, because it was it already was in a state of flux and having to readjust itself, as any group dynamic does anyway. And again, with my other group, because we just finished a game and we're moving into some other stuff, there was no... Because there's two different things with a role-playing group, isn't there? There's the people's group dynamic, the players, and there's the character group dynamic. So in terms of character group dynamic change, there hasn't been any really in either, because those groups were changing anyway. And in terms of the player dynamic, in my Wednesday group, I mean, for me, I think it goes back to the technology thing, which I spoke about earlier, which is where one of the people doesn't have a camera, and it almost feels like they're talking less and being less involved, actually, as a their characters are less involved because they don't have a camera. And it may be that the game that we're playing, as will happen in some games, some characters don't always have as much to give to a story as others do. So it may be that would have happened anyway, but it's you blame the thing that's right in front of you, don't you? So it's easy to go, oh, well, this person's being quiet, it's probably this. So yeah, it's been a funny one. And also, you know, in terms of moving from offline to online, I think this isn't a standard moving from offline to online. You know, if in 2019 you'd moved from offline to online and had issues, you could go, this is because we've done this. Whereas actually this year, it could be the group dynamic can change because people are horribly depressed because of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it, that's adding in, which is making it slightly more difficult to kind of judge on that, really.
Absolutely. John, you've been involved in a very long, ongoing offline campaign, which has had to go online this year, which I know because I run it. How have you felt it's altered group dynamics, if at all?
Well, I think it's really altered it for that particular campaign, because we haven't actually been able to continue that campaign. Because
sure, no, you're absolutely right. But the sessions themselves have gone on with different stories and stuff.
Yeah, there has definitely been a change. It's kind of hard to put into words, because two things kind of changed around the same time. Three things in a way. One, we lost a member of the group because they don't want to do online role playing. So the whole dynamic shifted because of that. And it wasn't like a pure transfer from offline to online, because as Matt referenced before, we had a player who was streaming in because he lives really far away. And before, when it was just him on a screen, it was really cool, but there was also a bit of a disconnect because he was digital and everyone else in the room was in the room with you. And I think that they also sort of sometimes struggled with speaking up because they felt like they were interrupting the people who are in the room and interacting with each other. Whereas now that we've moved online, they've gotten a lot more vocal. And also a couple of the people, myself included, I think, who are usually quite quiet in the room, I guess because of the body language of, like, there's always a couple of people that you turned to say something. And when you can't physically look to them in the corner of the room, like as your leader, then you sort of go, right, I'm here on my own and I need to think of what to say. And I've seen it both in the group and I've seen it in myself to an extent. And it's been interesting and I think good.
Yeah.
But that might just be the type of role player I am / was.
And this raises an important point in this. When we're talking about the challenges of moving from offline to online, that's fundamentally a question of change.
Yes.
And change is not always bad, but it is almost always a challenge.
Yes.
I think it's very important to recognize that it's a change that may suit some people as much as it doesn't suit others. And it's kind of, it falls almost to the GM naturally, although, again, a topic for another discussion entirely. to make sure that those changes are addressed, managed, and if necessary, balanced, which adds a whole new social dynamic on top of what the GM is doing, which is already managing social dynamics. So it's definitely a challenge to be planned and considered. Justin, as a runner of long ongoing thing, have you had anything this year that's had to transfer to online?
No, because much like Jonny, the Star Wars game that John and you were briefly in, and Steve has been that started up because to deal with the issue of us being spatially separated within the UK, and to fix that. So we'd already been playing that campaign for a few weeks or a few months maybe even before everything else shifted online too, and it kind of felt like we were glad that we had prep time now that it's all kind of kicking off. So that transition hasn't been as much of a problem, but that group is made up of people who are physically were physically in the location of the city where I now live, and people who are from the city where I used to live, where you guys are, and so. But not everyone from the group that I have in my current home city made that migration online because they didn't want to or whatever, so that causes changes, and I do wonder whether if I approach the same people now after they've been experiencing a digital life for the last 9 months and said, do you want to get back into the group and join a digital campaign, whether now they would go, oh, that sounds like something that I would have no problem doing. I've been doing that every day at work for ages, or whether they'd have the same opinion.
Yeah, and it's something where, again, obviously, as Jonny mentioned, the specific circumstances of this year mean that these things are up in the air even more so than they normally would be. Because as you say, you could say to someone in 2020, do you want to do an online role-playing game? And they could go, yeah. I might not have wanted to do that before, but now I'm used to doing online things. Or they could say, oh my fucking God, no, I cannot do more. I cannot do an improvised Zoom call. I can't do that on top of everything else that I'm doing.
And it should be said that because of this year, the tools that we have available, especially the video tools, are so much better than they were a year ago.
They
just couldn't do the same games.
They absolutely are. And big shout out to Discord, because Discord was so far ahead of the curve with this stuff. And they still haven't really found a way to monetize it. But I'm sure they'll be bought out and vultured by a venture capitalist sooner or later. I've been running stuff off and on Discord, or at least using Discord to pipe in players for a couple of years now. And what a game changer! What a difference a competent piece of software makes to the likes of Skype or other older kind of conferencing things that people use. TeamSpeak. Do you remember TeamSpeak? I don't even want to think about TeamSpeak. It's like remembering the dark times of the Empire. It's awful.
And before we used, I probably started using Discord so we could do video game streaming or video games together online. But before that, I just would have thought I'd have looked at the same way. I'd looked at people who play role playing games online probably the same way that regular people look at people who play role playing games in my teenage years. I'm
sure.
Online role playing.
Yeah.
What am I going to catch me online? So I think that I think that this whole thing has come across at the same time where gradually out in our regular lives we're moving to a situation where this was more possible.
Yeah, I agree. We have got, we're talking about a number of points here. So let's not kind of separate them out. We're talking about existing group dynamics. We're talking about, I've called them group vocal discrepancies, which sounds like some kind of condition. But what I mean is, like different levels of extroversion or loudness or what have you within a group, and it can exacerbate that or change it and shift it. We've talked about variance in group access to logistics, i.e., some people might not be able to afford the same kind of equipment that everyone that the other people can, and if there is those discrepancies, then that can jar the group as a whole. Potential. Like we've talked about how some players don't like to do online. You may lose players from it. You may even gain players from it who can only or would prefer to do it online. There we go. There's Chris. Chris, as someone for whom the shift from offline to online gaming has been done via a 10-year gap in doing tabletop role-playing gaming, do you feel like it's jarred more for you or less, or have you not even significantly felt the transition? Does it feel different from the activity you did all those moons ago?
Well, I mean, the very core and principal component of any tabletop role-playing game is the group, and exactly the same scenario could be run with even swapping out one or two of the players, and it would make just a huge difference to all of the factors we've discussed this evening. So I don't think the fundamentals haven't changed, and also there's kind of there's bits and pieces that have remained really eerily the same. I remember we were joking about a comment in the Vampire Discord where someone was like, working out what roll you'd have to make to, in a hurry, fill water balloons full of holy water. And I was like, this reminds me exactly to the letter of stuff we were doing in the 90s. Like, if I blood bond an ostrich, can I ride it from Belfast to Dublin to sack the Camarilla city of Dublin? And
we all remember those conversations.
Chris is not allowed on our vampire streams.
These things are mimetic. They're kind of, as people get older, they move through the role play with two L's. And I think they move towards the theatre of the mind.
John. You broke John.
Yeah, but we move towards these more kind of theatre of the mind kind of scenarios in our dotage, in our old age. And I think I haven't seen so much of a difference between when I left and when I arrived, because I think I arrived just before the Great Crash. I think I left. I left just before the great kind of 2000s crash, where like White Wolf was becoming increasingly unsustainable, and I think I left kind of when those big, beautiful special editions were kind of released. Was when I was approaching the end of my tenure, and yeah, nothing has changed, because everything in roleplay by its very nature is emergent. It's based on it's a collaborative storytelling thing.
I have an important question though.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you planning on getting an ostrich in Dublin?
Exactly.
Zoo.
I mean, come on, lads.
If your GM's main problem with that plan is where to locate an ostrich in a major European capital with so many amenities, then
look, welcome to the modern city of Belfast with all the amenities, regular ostrich access, and taxis at every corner.
No, surely the correct answer is you roll to contact your level 3 contacts.
Yeah. Gangrels, Gangrels
in contact with a gangrel involved in the illegal
Gangrel knows a guy.
Smuggling.
Gangrel's got an ostrich guy.
Yeah, the gangrel's frenzied so much they have ostrich features.
That's. I mean, it was in yes, but it's a clear point that these kind of touchstone moments of infamy are still more or less almost to word for word repeated generation by generation. Yeah. So nothing has changed. And more changes when a group changes than when a decade changes.
When the format changes, yeah.
Or when the format changes.
The next sort of thing to pick up on this kind of transition between offline and online is how the change in format can lead to a different experience, and that sometimes entails a reduced experience, right? So, for example, the example, and this is again something that Neil brought up, is For example, I mentioned earlier the switch we had to Roll20 in our offline group. Earlier, offline groups that was doing online, you know what I mean. Our non-streamed group was doing earlier this year, and it led to us dumping Roll20 very quickly. Of course, mileage may vary, and because the experience changed, it didn't feel like the same role-playing group anymore. And so we went back to like a format that was at least more like our offline days. And I think that we invest a lot in our role-playing campaigns by and large. I know not everyone does, and that's cool too. Like if you just want to knock around with it, enjoy the hobby however you want. But I think a lot of role players really do invest a lot of time and kind of their emotions. You invest a lot in a story, in your character, or in the story you're telling in the case of the GM, and in the group as a whole. Role play is fundamentally an activity largely between friends, and it carries a lot of emotional and personal investment and heft. And if that shifts, and you don't even need to do role playing to understand that. If a friendship group shifts for whatever reason, like there's a reason we look back on times at school or university or in a particular place or a particular job, and they almost seem like, golden years, even though they were likely anything but. And it's because the time has changed, the era is over. And I think that when you shift, when you make such a big shift in it, it can do that. I've rambled, but you get what I mean. I'm not sure there's much of a solution for that.
I think I've lost the plot or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with the broad strokes of what I could pick out from that.
No, because I think it's very much because I'm a creature of time. I have warped forward 20 years, and I agree entirely. There's certainly a nostalgia that comes, the currency of nostalgia that goes with the old times, and that's why these older experiences get their kind of gold plating around them, and we overlook some of the problems we had back then, be those problems that didn't affect us due to privilege, like the gatekeeping and accessibility issues that we all ignored, and also problems due to just kind of not really being fully developed people when we started, maybe being more kind of shock and more kind of Nine Inch Nails on in the background and killing a load of people for fun, and much less going into games in terms of examining a concept or a topic or using a setting as an allegory or stuff that we don't like sit down and plan that nowadays, but we all are aware and can enjoy it a little better for want of a decade of more life.
I couldn't agree more, with the slight caveat that I still have absolutely no problem putting Nine Inch Nails on in the background.
Yeah.
But,
or using stories as allegories.
Or using well, I don't think Chris was saying we don't do that, just that not everyone does that intentionally, or at least kind of pre-planned out. Has anyone here had like a I'm worried now that I didn't get my point across. But the idea that a changed experience can feel like effectively your campaign has ended and you started a new one, even though the only thing that's different is a shift from offline to on, and that therefore the experience is reduced, and that can lead to attrition, essentially. Like if someone isn't feeling it anymore, they might leave.
I can get that.
Not exactly the same thing, but I had I think last year the first time in a role-playing game where I've shed a tear. And I couldn't imagine doing that online, even if we'd run the exact same 10 sessions. If I wasn't in the room with the people, I don't feel like it would have the same effect on me. And it might, because I haven't had it. I can't say for definite, but imagining in my head us having done that exact same game, I can't imagine that it would have had the same emotional effect on me as it had.
Absolutely. I've run campaigns where players have got tattoos, of things related to their character in them. And again, I cannot imagine running an online campaign where someone would do that. That may be a gross exaggeration of the difference between the two. I struggle to picture it. I run, as a couple of people already mentioned, I run a Halloween game every year, like an offline, non-streamed Halloween game that is obviously attempts to be spooky and evoke a certain atmosphere. And this year, it had to be online, and it was great fun, and we had a great time with it. But while one of the things I pride myself on as a GM, and hopefully that's come across on the Telling Tales streams, is I think I do horror good, and I think I do atmosphere good. And one of my greatest pleasures in role playing is to describe something, hopefully not gratuitously awful, but awful nevertheless, and have people visibly react to that. And while this year I did get some people kind of commenting afterwards that bit was really horrible, really creepy, or really, really, a good horror moment. It didn't have the same, if I'm in person and hear someone, or you see on their face because some kind of don't like that, not in an unpleasant way, hopefully, or those things, or I can't imagine people. In an ongoing campaign, sometimes you get a group reaction, like a cheer, or people, or no, or whatever. A favorite NPC just gets flattened by a giant or whatever. I don't know what happens in D&D. These kind of moments, right? These kind of. And sometimes the 90s roleplay guy just comes out.
Look,
but these kind of moments are that can be a long-term thing in a campaign. Just feel there's a barrier there, right?
Yeah. So I think a lot of these things, I do agree with you, but I think that there is a real degree of framing and the contextualization of what happens. Drawing on Chris's point, we are all not the people we were when we started doing role-playing games, which for most of us was probably over a decade ago, and or maybe significantly over a decade ago. These are all framing so. One of the things we've been talking about is how this year has changed the way that we look at role-playing games, and we run role-playing games, and how we've developed. And we're at this kind of late stage of developing a style of role-playing games. We're in the late teens or early adulthood, where there's not much more change left to happen anymore. We're mostly fixed in how we think of role-playing games and run role-playing games, unless we have a big perturbation of some kind, like this event, for example. But for people who are coming to role-playing games now, they'll be saying, I was playing, in 20 or 30 years' time, they'll be saying, I was playing role-playing games back in the good old days of Roll20, when we didn't have any of these fancy flying 3D interactive soundboards, you didn't know how good yet. All we had was Discord, and that was, you couldn't even do a hologram on that, or something. You future kids, you'll be laughing at this and the thing. And the amount of impact this event will have on how future generations of role-playing gamers will think about what is a fixed part of the role-playing game experience and what is a malleable part of the role-playing game experience will be really big. And I think for a large part, we are all a little bit blind to that, because we have such fixed ideas about what a role-playing game should be. And someone just popped up, we'll probably pop up later, but 42's thing about the medium is the message is, I think there is that thing of, me and Jonny had all moved to Roll20 just before the pandemic hit, because we for various other reasons, and so it didn't really feel like it was as forced upon us as maybe other groups might have had. And there is that difference between whether you feel like you've embraced digital tools begrudgingly or enthusiastically, that might lead into how you've been playing your games.
I think that's a fantastic point. And yeah, we are, ultimately we are creatures of habit. And this in turn leads to the final point, which probably won't get a great deal of discussion, but I loved it so much when Neil proposed it that I have to just say it verbatim, and feel free to just type that in as the title at the bottom, John. Change is hard, man. It is. I come from a profession where, trust me, I know this more than most people. And like change fatigue, people struggle. And again, 2020. Ultimately, if what you do you are comfortable with and you have to change it, it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take an emotional toll, which usually leads to a physical and mental toll to a certain degree. And in the case of role-playing games, that may or may not be significant. Some people could, shrug their shoulders at that and go, it's just a game. But for a lot of people, it's an important release and it's an important part of their week and something that gives them a lot of joy. And in 2020, a little bit of joy's very important, right? So I feel like we've kind of naturally come to the end of that discussion. We've talked about the pros and cons, very loud clapping in the mic, apologies. We've talked about the pros and cons of online and offline play. We've talked about the challenges inherent in moving from offline play to online play. Hopefully it was constructive and you enjoyed listening to it. We'll have one last bit of comments and questions that John will gather for us. And while John is doing that, I will do the end plugs of the stream as opposed to the start plugs of the stream. We are telling tales. Maybe this is your first experience with us. What we usually do is we run actual play streaming sessions here on Twitch. And we also upload those VODs to YouTube. All the links for those things are down in the video description below. Whether you are watching this on Twitch or YouTube, we have social media channels. Telling Tales RP is our usual address, but it might vary a bit. If you look below, you'll find Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. You will also find our Patreon, and you can sponsor us there if you wish, or here on Twitch with a subscription. There's lots of tasty treats to be had over on our Patreon. If that interests you, check it out. We have 2 ongoing weekly streams at the moment, with more to come in January. We have a Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition game on Tuesdays and a Simbaroom game on Wednesdays. Yay! Boo! Yay!
There's no competition between the streams.
There's probably competition.
Don't cross the streams. That's what you've done this
it's a cardinal rule. It's a cardinal rule. They are on hold at the moment as we speak to you in the festive season of 2020, but they will return on Tuesday the 5th of January 2021 and Wednesday the 6th of January 2021. It will be in all our scheduled stuff down below as the time approaches. And in January, we'll be launching a new ongoing weekly series, Call of Cthulhu, GM'd by the wonderful, let me get this right, Jonny down there. And I'll be running Stream Manager for that as well. And we'll be starting up monthly one-off live streams. So there's plenty of stuff to come. If you enjoyed this, please let us know. Please let us know if this is worth our time doing more of, right? We enjoy it, but also we've only got so much time to work on this during the week. So let us know if you enjoy it and you want to see more kind of, I guess, is this podcasty? I don't know. I'm too old for podcasts. I'm too old for podcasts.
You're not too old for podcasts. You just say that.
Roundtable discussion thing. It's all good. John, throw the comments and the questions at us, please.
We've got some fantastic comments, starting from this fantastic one from Azimuth about our last point.
Change is hard, but sometimes it's worth trying. And again, from a professional standpoint, that sometimes is really important. Yeah, it absolutely is. And as we've said, we may have seemed maybe slightly down on online play, but it's worth reiterating the accessibility and reduction in kind of gatekeeping that it brings makes it an absolutely invaluable addition to the hobby. And it would be a much weaker and lesser thing if we did not have those changes as options for people.
We have a point from Blind Orphan about, I think it was about the overall experience shifting and how that can feel like a different campaign.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, certain people being listeners and certain people being visual or whatever is a slight exaggeration of the science. But yeah, I think ultimately it's going to... other people need to lean in if they have big opinions on this, because otherwise, because I'm used to being the GM on the street.
I've been harping on about it a bit across the topics tonight, but absolutely the concept, and other people have mentioned it again, the concept of redefining a role-playing game between either a top-down tactical skirmish or a theater of the mind improv experiment, and you put yourself on a spectrum there. And I think most of us, and I think at the risk of incorrect generalizations, most of us on this side of the Atlantic perhaps prefer theater of the mind to the more mechanical mechanisms. That's been my experience.
I'm not overly... Yeah, it's difficult because none of us can ever claim to have, grown up role-playing in America. But I don't know how much of a divide there is between kind of beer and pretzels play and more, or mapped play and more, what have you. But it's definitely a case that, online play will come more naturally to some people than others.
Yeah.
Next, we have... I'm going to dip back down to...
Yeah, I know 4242 had something quite a bit earlier that we said we'd flag up.
Yeah.
So let's grab that while we remember where it is. I think it was something about whether we're more
there we go.
Pre-planned GM or an improv on the spot. Let's just quickly go around each GM here and we can talk about it. My answer is going to be boring because I'm both. I very rarely do complete improv, but by the same token, I probably do far less pre-planning than most pre-planned GMs. Most of my preparation for a session, I can literally give an example right here, although I guess it might have spoilers if you squint really hard.
Someone did clock your index cards earlier.
Yes. Steve referenced them, I think, yeah. That's my notes for a session. So it is pre-planned, and there is kind of more than this because I have like reference documents. Oh, it's vampire. You wouldn't care, Chris.
Yeah,
I do, and there's no spoilers on it.
Reference documents, spreadsheets.
Yeah. That's a reference document.
Sure, like for a crazy person.
No, it's a very sensible reference document. How else are you going to catalog characters, eh? I do have reference documents that can be quite copious, but the boring, I guess maybe the boring answer is I rely on a lot of a large pre-preparation to the story itself, and then on session-to-session basis, minimal, and so I can stay loose.
Yeah,
and improvisational.
You'd like to know your story, you like to live it so much that you can improv it on the spot. So
yes. Like the big example for that is the big ongoing offline vampire campaign, which is based in Chicago, and I know Chicago by Night inside and out so well that improvising, while I have basically pre-prepared by reading that book for 30 years, like a lot of the improvisation is very natural and flowing, if I do say so myself, because of the familiarity. But that's enough about me, Justin.
I definitely relied too much on pre-planning early on in my GMing kind of experience, to a point where I got too railroady. And a few years ago, I kind of realized this. And the last few years, my emphasis has been trying to minimize prep as a kind of training exercise in the games that I run, which is kind of culminated in this Star Wars game, which in theory I run with zero prep, but it's much less. And so I think that although I think the real answer for everyone is ultimately both, I think that it's also important to recognize that, GMing is a skill, and even if you think you are God's gift to GMing, and I'm sure that all the GMs in this chat do think that it is a skill, and you do, and you can go through exercises and training exercises, and you can try different things, and you can shake things up for yourself, and those things are all very healthy and make you grow at that skill. In the same way that you shouldn't, if you like to paint, you shouldn't just paint the same painting every single time. You should try different things and stretch yourself and try to do new things to improve at the craft.
Yeah. As with anything, it's tempting for someone who's just starting to look at someone who's been doing it for decades and going, I can't do that. And it's like, not yet, you can't. Give it 20 years.
I'm still terrible.
Because as with most things, you internalize the skills. So it seems like it comes naturally, but actually it's come from an incredible amount of practice and mistakes, because that is how we learn. Jonny?
So for me, it varies depending on the game and the game's purpose. So the D&D campaign, the macro plot was planned. So you've got set points along it that are kind of like, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here. Within the sessions, I'll have touch points, but and I kind of, the way that I do it for myself is I write it in a Word document afterwards as like the next little bit of the story. So I'll have in there kind of, they did this, they did that, they met this person, this happened. And then that means that I can run on from that precise thing in the next session. And, you'll always have, if it's sort of a mystery, you'll have things that people find that they're then going to move on to. And really, you have to have planned those things that they're going to find, because otherwise your story isn't there, I guess. So, yeah, in more mystery things, there's a bit more planning on making sure that those things are nailed in, because the last thing that you want is for somebody to go, what's here? And you go, I don't know. And if you have to make that up, it can break your story. So you need to figure out the bits that you need to have nailed in so that your mystery isn't broken. Like, you need to avoid plot holes. And on the other hand, you can do things. This actually kind of ends up being more pre-planning, even though it might seem more free-form during the game. But I ran a one-off couple of hours Call of Cthulhu game for some of my Wednesday group a couple of weeks ago. And I kind of had a vague idea of the story, but I also had a number of, and there was foreshadowing for some things that didn't happen because I had a couple of different endings that could have happened depending on their actions. So it seems like they've made all the decisions, and they have, but you've got different endings planned depending on the decisions that they make. So it's kind of like,
Jonny, you're giving away our tricks.
I completely agree. Like, it was really interesting, like running the Halloween session that I ran at the two houses at two different times, because we got very different. It was like, very different experiences playing through the two sessions in very different ways, and like very different endings about how the players wanted to confront the final encounters and what they were willing to do, and how much, like, that kind of Cthulhu thing where you're like, I'm not going to do the crazy thing that's going to make me go insane and become a cultist, because I know how Cthulhu games work, and that's a bad idea. And other groups going, oh yeah, that's great, let's just read the spell books and they'll go through the crazy portal, and all of that is to say is that, things that seem like they're improvised often are things that that GMs can slot into any scenario, and this isn't true for every City GM. And then things that seem heavily planned because they're so perfect often are on the spot because they work.
I absolutely echo that, and I also think that Jonny made a very good point in. I think I kind of alluded to it, but like the carving between meta planning and kind of specific planning, which is I think that kind of meta planning is absolute. If you want to run a long form campaign, is absolutely one of the first best skills that you can do as a GM, kind of forming the boundaries and intricacies of your world. And I don't necessarily mean that as actual full world building, but kind of the parameters of how your campaign is going to work, the characters within them, the ongoing situations within them. And once you've kind of embedded those in your brain, the improvisation flows a lot more easily. Again, we could talk for an entire discussion about this. Jump us into the next one, John, and we'll do a couple more, and then we'll wrap this baby up.
Well, seeing as how we were talking about changing from the old days, what's something you'd like to see more of in future role-playing games?
Well, a blind orphan, aka Pierre from our vampire campaign. You know what? I think before you hopped onto the stream, I may have answered my view on that, which is automation of GM tasks via app or fundamentally via mechanics. I would like to see that. I would like to see more investment, again, within the role-playing industry, although with that comes other issues, as we see in any creative industry. But I would like to see it at least clamber a bit further up the ladder from where it is at the moment. And I would also like to see... I would like to see more games specifically embrace an intended audience. So while I appreciate the ability for games to be played however people want to play them, I feel like something sometimes goes missing when you make a game with an intended style so broad that nuance is lost. I definitely don't mean that in any kind of gatekeeping way, or, I definitely don't mean it in any kind of awful, keep politics out of our role-playing game kind of way. Quite the opposite, in fact. I feel like it's something that's bubbled to the surface with the release of Vampire 5th Edition, with a lot of people basically there's some people who want to play Vampire as a storytelling game of personal horror, which I don't want to say is the intention, but it is the slogan of the game. And other people who want to play it as a game of kind of superheroic vampires who travel the world Blade style and do badass stuff. I'm not saying people... Yeah, I'm not saying people can't play the game like that, or that it's not for them or anything like that. Play the game however the hell you want and have fun with it. Absolutely encourage that. But I do feel that when a system is built for the broadest appeal, it can lose something. And I feel like the biggest innovations the genre has had over the last forever, things like the advent of very specified game worlds through the early 80s, things like White Wolf and their work they did in the 90s, things like the indie RPG scene and how it's built with things like Fiasco or things like Monster Hearts, are where the genre and the hobby leaps forward. That's a very long answer to your question.
See, I think the 90s White Wolf catalog is a really interesting take on that. Looking back on it from now, and there's how many books do you think they released? Like how many?
What in total in all the lines?
Yeah.
God, I mean, it's obviously triple figures. I couldn't even begin to say. I'd a guess 200, 250.
But they're all so big and so varied that it's like even within World of Darkness and even within like one set, like just vampire or werewolf, there's still this big variation on what kind of game do you want to play, what kind of characters do you want to play. I remember you telling me about like mage in particular, because you can be basically wizards in urban fantasy, or you can be like spaceship dwellers adventuring through dimension.
Like the spirit world of deep space. Yeah,
and it's the same world and the same canon. It just depends on which supplements you can afford. And
yeah, I would say that's a great caveat to the argument I just made, essentially. But I would also say that we won't hit that level of variation again, and specified variation where people can take what they want from a game and still have the same thrust of the game without another company who are successful enough to produce 250 books in their game line. And I'm not sure that will ever happen again.
Yes, and also for them to sell it at a price that is cheap enough that you can get more than one, because I wasn't around in the 90s, but I hear the price of role-playing books have... I mean, I was around in the 90s. I just think about role-playing in the 90s.
Without...
The price of books has gone up.
Putting on my old man grunt pants, the version...
Did you ever take them off?
No. Thank God for everyone else. The version... Vampire 5th Edition cost me £50. 50 of my rapidly decelerating British pounds. Vampire Second Edition cost me 15.
Yep. All I say, and I mean, it's a little mean-spirited, but while there was a lot of variation in White Wolf, the entire oeuvre was basically the equivalent to an online quiz asking you what kind of goth you are.
Yeah, basically.
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely was. Justin, Jonny, and any notions for where you want role-playing games to go?
Just one thing, not necessarily where I would like them to go, but one thing that I would like to see more of. I can't think of any way that it would work off the top of my head, but mechanics that add to the feel of the game. So this is from Alien, basically, that I'm coming up with this, because the stress mechanic in Alien makes the rule set for me. I really feel like the way that builds up, and it's kind of helping you along the way, and then all of a sudden it goes horribly wrong. It is the perfect addition to the feel of the game.
I absolutely agree. I think like I'm not saying your point is my point, but like it's absolutely a more specific and clear way to say what I was kind of trying to move around. I would also add to that the hunger mechanic in V5, which I think adding that into the system was a stroke of absolute genius and makes V5 Vampire V5 the game that it is.
I was going to say something along the lines of, I think we all want to see a bit more diversity in what the games are and what kind of games there are. You know, I think it would be really nice for, so many of the role-playing game tropes are centered on like a Tolkien-esque medieval Western European non-existent thing, and not just that, but just so many other things. Even with very modern games, you often find yourself having to apologize for the way that certain things are like portrayed or done, or just and then. But that was kind of what I was going to talk about. But I actually kind of think that what you've said has made me think. If I've said in the past, role-playing games are about trying to find the broadest possible experience, and now what we're talking about is how role-playing games cater to the best possible experience you can have in this specific thing. The progression of that might be a system where role-playing games move to, the most indie, most forward-thinking role-playing games move to challenging their players using the mechanics, and not just challenging them like it isn't an encounter, as in challenging them philosophically with mechanics, like mechanics that look at things like your actions having effect on other people, how your social situations impact others, how your character's actions aren't punished by like a cosmic deity or a law system or a policeman, but instead the players are forced to face the impacts of their decisions. And that's just one kind of social, kind of liberal ethic type thinking, but other ones that might challenge the way that we value different things in societies. And that would lead into that idea of there being a diversity of thought in role-playing games. And so, going from that really broad experience to really specific but very good to going, can we actually, can we take this seriously as a creative exercise and make our players think about themselves and what they're doing, and not put that burden on the GM to make something interesting, but have a game that can't be played without introspection or personal growth. And I think that would be something that would be interesting to see.
I absolutely agree. I think a lot of games out there are doing great steps towards that. It is time, so we will move on. But I would just like, if the kind of thing Justin is talking about appeals to you, a very strong recommendation for you to pick up a system called Hillfolk, which is based entirely around the impact on relationships between the characters as opposed to their impact on the world or the world's impact on them. Is there anything quick we could pop in there, John? Because we're already at 10:30 here. But I don't want to leave anyone out if they made a comment. But if there's anything quick we can add in.
I think the main call to your questions after this was...
Yeah, that's where it went, didn't it?
And also, which
why
I'd
do
set
British
you
people
the video
hate
of
James
it.
Corden so much? Yeah.
Well, we'll have to answer
We
that on
don't
the
have
next
time.
stream.
That
Yeah,
is,
so
again,
that you'll
a
have to
whole
tune
discussion,
in.
A whole
I think-
discussion on his own. He's a bit. The quick answer: he's a bit cringe for us.
I think also
He
what it
should have
comes
just
down
stopped Gavin
to.
Stacey.
I think also what it comes down to is I didn't hate my computer until I had to be at it all the time. Once you see something for 8 hours a day on your screen, you go off it. And that's what happened with James Corden, I think.
Yeah,
I think
basically.
it's one of those things where if you're from kind of the culture and you can recognize the signifiers of it, you can recognize when someone is maybe being a bit over the top and irritating better than if you're coming at it from across the pond or wherever. Also, the question about bees: how many bees can I fit in my trousers? Less as every year goes by, Pierre, and that's the sad truth. And on that note of the horrible universal nature of entropy, let's move on. Thank you very much to all the other folks I've discussed this with. Thank you to John and Chris and Jonny and Justin. Thank you to everyone at Telling Tales, but maybe especially Neil and Steve for helping us prepare the bullet points for this discussion. Thank you to everyone for watching and enjoying it, whether you've done it live or you're doing it later on Twitch or YouTube. Once again, a quick plug. We have an ongoing series of Vampire and an ongoing series of Symbaroum. Those are currently shuttered for the festive period, but they will start again on the 5th of January and the 6th of January. So 5th of January is the next time we will see you, lovely people. Thanks again, and we hope to see you again soon. From Telling Tales, have a lovely festive season of 2020 and a good new year. Farewell, folks. Farewell.